Nothing Personal starts in 30 seconds. It's just business. This is Nothing Personal. Domonique Foxworth. That's the Nothing Personal word of the day. It's a sit down, and we are lucky enough to have the man who I spent a week with in South Florida only recently, and now he's a guest on the show. Who would have thought that this partnership would have happened? Domonique, welcome to Nothing Personal.
Thank you so much, man. I thought it. I've known it ever since I saw you that we would be great partners.
It's funny because Dan, in his universe, Dan Lebitard, put us together, and he tries to put people together, and he wants his friends to be friends. That is a big thing for him. And when there is any ill will between friends, and there was never ill will between us, we are just come at issues from different standpoints, which actually makes for great conversation and great intellectual discourse. But it's something that Dan has spoken to me about many, many times, Domonique. You know, you really have to spend time with Domonique.
Yeah, Dan is he's a softie, and he thinks everyone else is going to love each other. But I think between you and I always recognize that you would say things that bother me, but also always recognize that the idea of nothing being personal is something. Well, I don't think anybody can be 100% business all the time. So there are some things that I think are obviously very personal to you, but I recognize that you didn't take anything too personally, and you recognize that all this was either business or entertainment. So I never anticipated having any issue with you.
I just know that sitting next to you in a studio was very enjoyable to me because it is fascinating, and it always has been in my career. Even before I got into sports, I'm always interested in what the other side is thinking, because to me, that's the easiest way and the easiest path to victory is understanding the objectives of the other side. What do they need? What do they want? And how do I give someone what they need and want while still getting everything I need and want? And you have the ability to articulate in a way that I try to articulate a position, and then the reason you got to the position, and then how serious you are about not letting go of a position. And I'm curious, I want to start off by talking about this. How early in your career, or maybe in your life, did you recognize, listen, I am a world-class professional athlete. I'm that good, but I may be better at off the field discourse?
Yeah, well, the athlete part it's weird. It sounds a bit arrogant, but it's not. It's that I never realized that I wasn't. And I think much like all young kids, or a lot of young kids, they think that they're going to be like making professional sports. I was the best kind of kid in my elementary school at sports, and then similar things happened at the next level, and then at the next level. So at no point was I confronted with the idea that I wasn't going to make it to the next level. Of course, once I got to college, I wasn't like the best, but I was the best at my position on my team and among the best in my conference and that sort of stuff. So, and then it's kind of a cliche, but you do everything the way you do anything. It's kind of the way that I approach things. And it's just like a bit of a competitive streak. So the off the field stuff, like I wanted to be a better student than other people because they're not smarter than me. I wanted, and as toxic as this sounds, I wanted to have the prettiest girlfriend. Like I wanted to be the best at everything. And it is a bit of a toxic trait, I think, but I think that there are some benefits to it, and it's worked out to me. I've tried to balance that as I've gotten older, more mature, that competitive urge. But I think I never thought I wasn't going to be good off the field.
But what happened on the field, the transition, many, many players, and you know this as well as I do, it doesn't always go well, the transition from being a professional athlete to your post-career. People don't realize the Hall of Famers need to find something to do at 40. Right. And most people need to find something to do at 24, 25, sometimes 18. you had the epiphany at some point. Do you remember the moment where you said, "Uh-oh, it's going to be time"?
It wasn't like I had dinner with Lloyd Howe last night. He's the new executive director for the NFL Players Association, and we talked a bit about transition. And I was explaining, and he and I were just discussing how everyone goes through transitions. You don't have to be a former player to understand what it's like to go through that transition. And I was not dreading the end of my career. I retired earlier than I had to, in part because I participated in CBA negotiations and my eyes got open to the idea that the people on the other side were the most successful businessmen in the world and I could hang with them. So that's when I was like, all right, I don't want to play football anymore. I want to transition. I want to apply to business school and figure out what's next. But I think I was surprised that the transition was even hard for me. I anticipated that I'd be ready for the transition. I was choosing this transition. I'm smart. I got into a fancy business school. Everything's going to be great. But part of it's not a transition if there isn't a dark period. And part of it was a little bit dark and a little bit uncomfortable. But then you come out on the other side a changed person and with new motivations and new purpose in life.
I want to talk about Lloyd Howell because it's very prescient that you had dinner with him recently, because I want to talk about the 18-game schedule and some comments he made. But I'm interested, you blew over business school and an elite business school. You went to Harvard.
Yeah.
It's the best business school in the world. And so when you were applying to Harvard, when you got there day one, I want to get inside your mind, and I'll tell you a very quick story about when we signed minor league baseball players who've been the best in elementary school. They've been the best in high school. They're always the best on every field. Then they get into the clubhouse at spring training and they're like, oh my God, everybody is as good as I am. And it happens when people get into school like Harvard Business School. You're the best at everything. And then you say, wow, there's other smart people. Did you have any insecurity at all as a professional athlete? Or you just went in blazing saying, hey, I am here and you better watch out?
I don't want to say no insecurity. I imagine there was some bit of trepidation. I don't remember feeling all that nervous because I had this unique background. And that's the cool thing about Harvard Business School. While you could say it's the best in the country and it's probably up there in the rankings, it's also probably easier to get into than places like Yale, where the Yale's class is like 120 people, Harvard's is 900. And part of what they look for is diversity of experience and diversity of thought, because they're like ethos, I guess, is we learn from each other as much as we learn from the professors. So I had no competitors. If you think of it that way, like there's a bunch of people that come from consulting and they're competing with all the consulting people. There are investment people. There are people who want to do nonprofit stuff. And those are the people who they're comparing themselves to. I'm the only former professional football player there. I'm the only one who had participated in super high level CBA negotiations. And so I remember we had some cases early on that were related to sports. And I remember the professor called on me. It's like the first couple days, it's case study method. So everyone's supposed to like participate in the conversation and the professor's really just supposed to guide it. And the first day they called on me to talk about international sports and the challenges that it comes with being an athlete and that stuff. So like immediately I'm this guy who is unique from everyone else. So if the diversity of experience is something that they truly value and they did, then I had one of the more diverse experiences there. And so it was easy. But
was it even in your head that you would end up being paid to talk for a living?
No, that's the funny thing is I wanted to do the opposite. So I had viewed myself, and this was again a part of the transition, was reckoning with who you actually are and how different you actually are. I'd always viewed myself as like the smart athlete, and I can go do something else. I don't need to like talk about football. Like I had a negative kind of view of the athletes who left sports and then went and talked about sports. Like do something else. So this was the opposite. I ended up in this position randomly because we were in New York and I was working for the NBA Players Association, and my wife got pregnant with our third child. And we were like, look, we can't live in Manhattan with 3 kids. It's just not going to work. Her whole family's from DC. So we were going to come back to DC eventually. And that was it. So I quit the job and I started just writing because that's when the real tough transition happened, when I didn't have anything to do. Because going from being like a kid who wants to get to the NFL to a kid that wants to get a scholarship to a kid that wants to get drafted to a kid that wants to get a second contract to wanting to get into business school and then working at the union, it was always very clear what my objective was, and there was never really much time to sit down and just be with yourself. And then when I didn't have a job, I was like, oh shit, this is tough. And I started writing, and then ESPN was like, hey, you want to write for us? And I was like, sure. Then they were like, we don't pay writers that much, you need to go on TV. And I was like, oh, all right, guess I'm on TV. And next thing you know, I'm enjoying it and I like it.
So let's talk about the NFL and the union. I want to talk about your time with the NBA union, but you opened the door with a meal you shared with the executive director of the NFL Players Association. The big talk now, they're in the middle of labor peace, but the big talk is about an 18-game NFL season. Mm-hmm. And I've spent some time recently on Nothing Personal talking about it. I view it as a fait accompli, and now it's just a matter of the trade. And I wanted to understand, when you're given your experience, and you have experience both every which way now, when you're thinking about a trade like an 18-game NFL season, how do you quantify what you want back as a player versus what you want back as someone who works as an executive director of a union? Mm-hmm. How do you decide what you want in that trade?
I don't want to be naive, but I sincerely believe that the players' feeling about it is all that really matters. And like, I understand that the executive director is aware that he is being judged, and all this stuff is going to go on his report card inevitably, and they're going to write articles about how well or poorly you did. So I understand that it's there, but all that matters is what the players want, because that's essentially where the strength to get anything comes from, is how committed the players are to sacrifice and, frankly, to get the ends that they deserve. And so when we were negotiating, 18 games was put on the table, and it was a non-starter. It was not too long after we had kind of heard about or discovered the New York Times article about how the NFL was hiding brain injury research from us. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of adding more games was just a non-starter for us. It ended, they put it on the table, and we were like, all right, well, this is something we actually will not have a discussion about. It feels like that has changed because they've gone to 17 games. So I'm not sure how the players feel about it now.
You know, I don't know how you deal with such a large constituency, because I think you made a blanket statement that I would push back. I think there are plenty of members of the NFL union, players union, who would want an extra a game day paycheck, whether they're on the taxi squad, whether if they're paid at the minimum. The theory is that the minimum salaries will go up, or even if they stay the same rate, you're still getting paid an extra game. And in theory, if that game is paid more, and I actually don't know the answer, is the preseason rates. In baseball, we don't pay players for spring training.
No,
that's why
they get paid, but it's nominal. It's not doesn't compare.
So you agree that the regular season rate is greater than preseason? Oh, yeah. So trade of a regular season game for a preseason game, if that were to be a trade that the NFL would do, there are a bunch of members of the union who would actually want that. No?
I don't know. That's the point that I was making, is I know how the players felt back when I was on the executive committee, back when I was president. It was a non-starter because it wasn't, like I mentioned, it was about brain injury. We had just discovered that they'd been hiding stuff from us, and we had no understanding of how dangerous this game really was. So the idea of adding another check, I can't speak for all 1,800 members, but the general consensus was, no, we're not even going to discuss this. We're looking for ways to reduce the impact of head injuries. We're looking to reduce practice. We're looking to eliminate 2 days. We're not looking to add more of the most intense contacts to our brains that there can be. So that's how it was at the time. And I can imagine that I'm sure you can imagine how different the atmosphere was then, coming off of that discovery. So again, I think the players might feel differently now, and they obviously felt differently when they went to 17 games, but that's how it was then. I don't know how they feel now. I'm not in those meetings anymore.
But do you not think that the increased quality of equipment as a player, I can't answer this, you can, did that give you increased bravery? to do things. Imagine if you didn't have a helmet on, Domonique. Do you not agree that there'd be fewer concussions if no players wore helmets? And I actually, this is anecdotal, when the NFL had the leather helmets with no face masks, were there fewer concussions? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I mean, I'm sure they weren't diagnosing things the same. I do know that there were enough deaths in football that it became illegal at one point, and the NCAA was only instituted in order to put some safety guidelines in to keep players from dying in college sports. So, like, I can't pretend like I'm an expert on the impacts. Like, I've heard that presented as a solution in the past. I think that you could easily argue that maybe it will reduce the amount of like concussive or subconcussive episodes, but I don't think it would. I think it would probably increase the amount of really violent, dangerous plays, if that makes any sense, because there are some guys who will not care. While you suspect that most guys will be more careful, there are guys who will not care. And
well, that seems horrible.
And then the results of that, maybe we end up with less guys with the minor type of concussions, but we'll absolutely end up with guys who have their face exploded on a particular play. So I don't think eliminating helmets seems like a reasonable solution.
Well, of course it's not going to happen, but it just makes me wonder. And, you talk about what the union wants and how you have 1,800 players that you are representing. Howell's job is not easy. DeMaurice Smith, Gene Upshaw, you can go back and back. But this year, specifically in the NFL, I think the number Koki gave me is 13 teams have 4-day turnarounds twice for games. And that was agreed upon in the CBA. So I'm wondering if that is just an indication that maybe the safety of it all is not really the number one issue for the players.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to base, and this might sound a little counterintuitive, but I think the actual agreement, it's hard to use that to determine how important things are for players, because we've talked about this before. It's not a fair fight. The power and leverage and the time horizon that the ownership and the league side has compared to the players is tremendous. So oftentimes, if the league really wants something, I think it's more a reflection of what the league thinks is important than it is a reflection of what the players think is important.
But you have to choose when you're inside the union and you're doing those negotiations, you then have to choose what you are going to make to be important. And in baseball, as an example, we knew we had the players right where we wanted them when Tony Clark wanted to talk about chefs in the clubhouse,
right,
and wanted to talk about, earlier games so you wouldn't land at 4 a.m., which of course the players really didn't care much about, but he would call it player comforts. And so you're trying to deal with these issues, yet, because that's what maybe the electorate wants. And then you have the NFL who does all these surveys. And so the Players Association, they did a survey about who's got the best training facilities, and they ranked the owners. Have you seen those surveys?
Yeah.
And so it made me think to myself, what are we talking about here? Because to me, all of the things in those surveys, if I am representing a union, I'm trying to get protection. I'm trying to get guaranteed money. And I'm trying to make it a little bit more like the NBA, where I see players getting 50 a year, or MLB, where players, every penny is guaranteed upon signing. And I would think that as a focus, that would be it for the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I think guaranteed contracts is something that people talk a lot about that I don't think is as valuable as people suggest. If it's something that players want to go after, then fine. It's something that the players would like to go after. But I think what would end up happening is you just end up with shorter contracts, and they would just guarantee less money. Like all the fluff at the end of a contract would be cut off, which sometimes that fluff is an advantage to the players. So if you backload a contract, then you can force your way out to become a free agent and get that money again soon. So I think guaranteed contracts is not something worth sacrificing for, because it's not it doesn't mean that it will guarantee the contract at the number that it's at now. It just means that they will then guarantee your contract. So some of those things.
Blown away, Domonique. It's the number one issue in MLB. It's the number one thing that the union, we could do anything. But if you talk about, because we've brought it up, we'd like there to be an NFL style pay for performance. And the fact that there's guaranteed contracts in MLB to protect against injuries or lack of performance is the number one thing that they don't want to let go.
No, it's an entirely different system. So that system is, at least last time I looked, was uncapped, and there's a different system. So yeah, that's a different type of leverage and guarantees that you can get. I think we assume that all these leagues, because they're professional sports, they are run the same because they use similar terminology like caps and contracts, that the way they operate are completely the same. Having been a part of two unions, I recognize that those things are not the same. It means something different it has different impacts on different players. And so I do think that those big numbers that you see in MLB and the NBA, the NFL players want it also, but I don't think that's the way to actually get it, by saying we force the guaranteed contracts. That makes sense.
What is, no, I get it. What if you're if you're a running back and you're a part of a union and you see yourself being marginalized, and guaranteed contracts, to me, they eliminate that entire concept. Now, they may only eliminate it for a period of 5 years or a decade because things change. But when you sign a running back to a guaranteed deal of 5 years, but within that 5-year period, their importance becomes marginalized, that guaranteed money is still theirs. But if it happens when you don't have a guaranteed contract, you're left scrambling and not getting what you think your value is. So I keep going back to my same question, because the commissioner has a hard enough time dealing with 32 people. You've dealt in the NBA and NFL. You've got 1,800 people in the NFL. And I want to dig a little deeper because you keep saying it's about what the players want. How do you figure out what they want when I can promise you, and you agree, I hope, they don't all want the same thing?
Absolutely. They don't all want the same thing, but that's why you have meetings. That's why you go to every facility and talk to as many players as possible. That's why you have reps to talk to the players. That's why you have regional directors that talk to the players. It's about having the communication and figuring it out. And at the rep meetings in March, I think they normally are, you come together and you figure out what points you think you can move on and what points you can't move on. It's just about communication. And I think it's about them believing that you are listening also. It's not just listening. It's about them believing that you're listening.
But it's so political, because you have an executive council. You do have team reps. You can hear, I'm going to give you the example from the other side. The commissioner's office, before every CBA in baseball, sends out a questionnaire to every team president. What matters to you in this next negotiation? And you put down your list of things. You work with your staff. You come up with a paper 10 pages long of things you want to see, and then you get a call from the head of labor. All right, what is a no vote for you? Right. Let's really get down to it, because there's 32 votes. There's 30 votes. You need 23 to get a CBA. And so the commissioner has to find out, what does it mean? What do I have to give you to get you to vote yes? For the players, when you were putting together CBAs, I assume you're counting votes when you're analyzing issues. You're doing the same thing baseball does on the commissioner's side, no?
Yeah, you absolutely are. But you also, like, your point saying it's political. Yeah, different people have different amounts of power, I would imagine, amongst the ownership class. And there are different constituents and small factions within the class that will vote together and behave together. And that's your job as the commissioner to know that. I don't think it's any different for the executive director or the president union or the executive committee of the union. It's the same thing. It's understanding those groups, who has the power, who's impactful, who has the influence, and what's most important to them. Because that's what's moving the union. That's who's going to determine, inevitably, at the end of the day, it's going to be what happens, or at least what happened in our negotiation was, the leaders are going to have to lead, and that's who decides it. Most teams go along with who the leaders are on their team, and most of the leaders on the team go along with the leaders that they elected. So you said it's political, and I think political has a negative connotation most of the time, but I think maybe democratic is a better way to explain it. And it's you vote for a representative democracy is the best way to explain it. You vote for people who represent your interests, and you trust that they'll do so.
So that's funny, because to me, the frustrations, and now we can talk politics if you want, but the frustrations that people feel is that they're not being represented by the people who are actually supposed to represent them. And the danger in that is that you can become disengaged, and then you can feel as though you're powerless to block. And if you really care about something, but you can't get 7 other teams to agree with you, you are basically shouting into the abyss. And I have to believe it's the same with the power inside the union, that there are certain, when you are running things as the way Howell is, you talk about leaders. I'm talking about leaders who can quash. And we saw the coup attempt in the baseball union. We're talking about leaders who can quash any sort of noise of people getting together and forming a block that can outshine or outvote the leaders. So you're managing that too, way as much as you're managing issues, aren't you?
Of course. And you're not, I mean, the good thing is the way that you manage that is the same way that you do your job. It's relationships and it's FaceTime. And I think maybe there are some uprisings or coup attempts that you do have to quash, but I think a real leader avoids those. Like, we don't get to that.
Until you can't.
Well, I think most of the time you can. Like, guys aren't stupid. Like, I imagine that the people in the owners aren't stupid either. The players aren't stupid either. They recognize they don't get everything that they want. And this happens often, I think, in most walks of life, is that people will say and do things differently when they're in front of you than when you're not there. So I think
like middle school.
Yeah. Oftentimes people are talking real reckless about how this person ain't representing them and this union don't do this and this union don't do that. They won't say those things to the union leadership. And if the union leadership is around often, those things don't rise up. I think that's the biggest problem, is people feeling unheard, not feeling that they don't get the outcomes that they want. It's that they don't feel like anyone's listening to them, or they're disconnected. I think that's been
so
my
funny,
experience.
Domonique, because my view, and of course, as a team president, you put suggestion boxes in the front office and you do meetings with your employees because you want everyone to feel heard. But I don't think anyone gets fooled by any of those.
No, I think, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I think that they recognize that that's BS. I think it's a difference than doing that lip service stuff and like genuinely having conversations with people and explaining to them. That's the thing that I found is often in big organizations, there's a feeling of, I'm up here and I'm going to make these decisions that impact you. And then you do like a suggestion box to think that's going to make them feel good. If you sit down, because you're accepting that you as a leader aren't smarter than the people that work for you, they understand. That's what I found with the players, is like, if the answer to what they want is no, how I got to that answer, I can get to them to that answer also, or they can open my eyes and realize that that's not actually the answer. Normally, adults recognize that they can't have everything that they want. And if you lay out to them how this shit works, how we ended up here, how difficult it's going to be, that was the issue that was what ended up happening with a lot of our CBA negotiation stuff. Was like, guys, we want this. We're not moving. We don't get that. Fine. Okay. We are now at the 11th hour. How bad do you want it? We are going to have to give up checks. Okay. I'm down to give up checks. I already got paid. I got my big payday. If you are ready to withstand this and you think that the guys in your locker room can live through this, I can do it with you. We can vote no.
Are you doing that at the 11th hour, Domonique, or you have that going into a negotiation where you know whether or not there's an appetite for a strike?
No, you're doing that all the way through the process. But my point is, with 1,800 people, there are some people who pop up at the 11th hour who weren't around and are like, all right, I want this. We're not getting this. And I look them in the eyes and you tell them, like, look, we've been doing this process the whole time. This is the deal that we got right now. Are you willing to look at the rest of these players and say, look, we are going to withstand this lockout. Nobody's getting paid. And everyone is ready to like sacrifice a year of their career. Is that what we're doing? If that's what we're doing, then we can.
But are you giving that time of day to someone who doesn't have power inside the union?
Absolutely. Well,
just to some 51st person, I may have the number wrong, Coco.
Right.
The 51st person on the roster who calls you in the 11th hour as you're trying to finish a deal. We are right up against it. Some guy pops up on and says, by the way, I'd like to talk about the following 2 things. There's no time for that.
Well, I mean, that's why you have to empower other people. So each team has a rep and an alternate. hopefully the rep and the alternate have been managing this relationship. If they have not managed the relationship, yes, that's exactly what we're doing. And we're doing it in front of everyone. And it's like, all right. And it often doesn't happen. Who is going to be the 51st man on the roster who stands up at the 11th hour and says, I don't want this? And it's fine. I think you're not going to be able to eliminate the uncomfortable conversations. You're going to have them sometime. And the later you wait, the more uncomfortable they're going to get. So don't run from them. Go have them as soon as you can, as often as you can.
How much do you miss being in that arena?
A lot. Yeah. I mean, the high stakes of it was fun and it was great. And I miss it a lot.
So when you are, and I miss running the baseball team as well. So I'm empathetic, which is not a feeling I have often, but if the phone would ring to get you, like you had, you speak to Hal, hey, I need you back.
Yeah.
Are you willing to do, and I'm using this in the wrong way, but we'll laugh, a JJ Redick, which is give up your media career to go coach, which is not the same because running a union is way, way more important than coaching. Is that something you'd consider?
I was a candidate for the job. Yeah, I obviously am complete support of Lloyd. If there was a reason or an opportunity for me to get involved and actually help, then absolutely I would walk away from my media career for something like that.
Can you do both? There are people now, it's so strange with the microphone that people have in the platform that there's a line. We just don't know where it is about what you can keep doing. And people use social media. Our president uses it. The former president uses it in a way where he doesn't have to, care. Is there a line where after which you're so involved on the union side that you cannot be in media anymore?
Well, I think it depends on what job you're doing for the union. But I don't know what the line is at this point. As long as you're not like surreptitiously doing anything, as long as you're disclosing your affiliations, I think that would be a question for the media outlet and the union, because I think you're right. There is some value in being involved in the media while also being at the union.
Because I say that because a lot of what happens during these CBA negotiations is there's a lot of public posturing. And I assume there's a budget in your union. There was a budget for PR, like there is a budget at the commissioner's office. And I look at those statements that both sides release and they just make me laugh because we're on the inside and we wonder if we're pulling one over is it pulling the wool over the eyes of the American public or the world public? And so it's funny that you talk about using your platform because you would be uniquely positioned. And I've never seen anyone have this position actually, where you have a high up job in a union and a platform, a responsible platform that you could actually use to accomplish the goals of that union. You may be the only one, Domonique. I've never seen that before.
Yeah. I mean, it's something. I think that I think that when I say things now, people assume that it's dripping in pro player bias. So I think it does, while I agree with you that platform is of some value, I think that it will be different than if a completely disconnected person had an opinion, a pro player opinion. It would be received differently. So if I was actually receiving a check from the union, I think that does devalue any perception of objectivity, but it still has a point. I think honestly, more than anything, it's about communicating with the players, because players get so much of their information from the way that the fans feel about things.
It's such a nightmare, social media, for myriad reasons, but trying to control messaging as a company now has become absolutely impossible. And we've witnessed in the past month the most unbelievable things in our political climate, things that people are saying could be the craziest they've ever seen. Obviously, the assassination attempt on a former president, Joe Biden not running for re-election. And all I keep thinking about is what I can do to make people understand that maybe this political climate is not necessarily as different as previous political climates as they think, and that this needs to be an issue-driven election versus the divide that exists and there are comparisons I make to the union and CBA. Do you ever think about where we are politically and sort of draw a line between that and where we are in sports as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard not to. We aren't nearly. I think there's probably European governments that probably align more similar to union management relationships because we are required to work together and in a way that a parliamentary system is more similar to that. Whereas, and I guess we still have Senate in the House and they
We're
have
supposed to have three branches.
right. But I'm just saying. Yeah, I don't. The branches are different to me than what I'm thinking is. It's more about size. The branches aren't sides. It's more about two sides being forced to work together. Whereas I don't know that we have nearly as much of that in the government as we do in sports. Because if we don't, we can't have these leagues essentially. So we do work together.
It's interesting because I think that you would have people on the right and the left say that it's not that much different than players and owners or management and labor. And in fact, sometimes the parties are called that. But what I think what worries me more, and this is happening in sports now and in baseball more than ever, there's way less listening.
Mm-hmm.
And you keep talking about how important it is to talk to the players and understand where they're coming from. And the discourse has just changed. Have you not noticed that? Did Howell talk to you about that? Do you think about that with the NBA, that everyone is so resolute in their position that your view of getting people to understand the position, which is extremely magnanimous and important, it's getting harder now, no?
I don't know if it ever was easy. It's always been really hard, I'm sure. I think Lloyd comes at it from the right place. And this is one of the benefits of having an outsider like him is that he's willing to look at these things differently. And he's a calm, kind of even-tempered guy who is listening to both sides. And he's had meetings with players, former players, had meetings with the ownership and class and with the commissioner in the league. And I do think, at least in my conversation with him, it sounds like that's what he's doing right now, is listening and looking for ways to do things differently. And that's like
doesn't everyone do that? When you get a new job, you say, all right, I'm going to spend the first part of this just meeting with everyone and listening so I can get my feet wet, understand the issues.
Of course, everyone does that. They should, at least. I think how genuine they are in doing that, and the fact that he is completely new to this world is different. So had I been selected, I would have come in with some level of baggage and some belief that I understand this business better than he does. And while I would have gone on this same listening tour, I don't know that I would have been as receptive because I have a track record.
Was Lloyd Howell trying to get your support? Was he trying to get information from you? Was it just eating a hamburger?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think this is a part of his listening tour. It's like former leadership of the union. It's like, he's been on it for more than a year now and he's still going. So I think he's still, he doesn't need anything from me.
Well, I doubt that's, it's funny. I don't know that people have dinners to spare these days.
I don't think it was a dinner to spare. I think it's a part of the listening. It's like, I want to know what a former president, someone who's participated in the CBA, how you look at this, a former player who's in the media. I do think that, of course, he wants me to feel favorably about him. I don't think that that wasn't lost. Yeah, no, that wasn't lost on me. I'm sure that's a thing. But yeah, we didn't leave with some ask. He wasn't trying to get me to do anything.
The smartest people don't do the ask on the first date.
All right. Well, then when the ask comes, the ask will come.
Date.
All right.
I think there's going to be a second.
When it comes, it comes. I'll figure out then. Until then, I'll do what I can to support him and the players.
Who is the toughest person you ever negotiated against ever in your life? I'm guessing your wife, maybe, but other than her.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, you probably lose to her all the time.
Yeah, I don't. I learned a long time ago is that you have to do. It has to be her idea. So. Once it's clear that I'm on the other side, I've already lost.
That's actually how you can negotiate with everyone, is give them the win and making that's actually how to be a good leader, is have your followers think that the direction you're moving was their idea to begin with.
That's a lesson that I learned with her, but like actually my son, we had 3 kids and he's in the middle, and he's the most difficult to get to do things that he doesn't want to do. And so we're past the age where you can like physically force kids to do things. So if you
I would hope not. What does that mean? Like with a
no, I just
belt?
mean yeah, just like yeah, any type of we don't hit our children, that's all I'm saying.
Right.
Like
Good.
that when I was
I
growing
didn't
up,
think you
like
did.
yeah, when I was growing up, I got hit,
Ooh,
and it would
like
make
spanked or hit?
yeah, spanked, I guess. I mean, it
I was
was
spanked too.
yeah, it
Never
was
belted. I was spanked like over the lap.
it's like an old movie. I like that.
Does your son want to play football?
He does.
And what's your view of that?
Putting off before he was born and when he was really little, I would say never, but I am accepting now that he still is really into it, and at some point we're gonna let it happen. But we've been doing flag up until now. He's going to the 6th grade, so we'll see what happens sooner or later. I think if he still wants to, we're gonna let him.
How old were you when you first put pads on?
10.
So he is 6th grade, which would make him 12.
He's 11 right now. He'll be 12.
So does he ever say, Dad, what's going on here? You did it.
Yeah.
You did it younger than I am. Like, put me in pads right now.
Yeah, and it's like we have more information than I had then.
So you are now touching on, and we walked ourselves into this. This is Roger Goodell's worst nightmare. For you to be actually thinking about whether your son should be in pads at 10, 11, or 12 is exactly the problem of why I think he focuses so much on fantasy and gambling, etc., because he's getting a little worried about youth participation, which is something that the other sports want more of, like baseball. There's so much money poured into get people playing baseball. Parents don't have the same aversion to baseball as they do to football. And if you, Domonique, are concerned, wait, is this you or your wife? Who's concerned?
It's definitely me. Yeah.
So your wife would have put him in pads at 10?
I think I don't know. She definitely wouldn't have gone out of her way to put him in pads, but and maybe it's just because I was more aggressive that she didn't feel the need to, but she kind of defers to me, like whatever. When you think it's right, you think it's right.
So how do you answer the question when someone says to you, because you answered it to me, and I want to ask you to dig a little bit on that. You said, hey, I know more now than I knew then. I believe you said that. There's more information now than there was then.
Right.
Is that, do I have that right?
Yeah.
So how do you then say to yourself, well, something is wrong in the game, that the more information I get makes me more scared of having my child participate in the sport that I excelled at, that I was paid to do?
Yeah, it's a sport. It's not like a person. I'm fine with it'd be harder for me to accept that somebody that I loved was not the person that I believed him to be. Like I think I identify myself as an athlete, but I do have some identity outside of that. So like I'm comfortable with being like football isn't the perfect sport that I thought it was when I was a kid. Like that doesn't seem like a hard disconnect for me to make.
Wait, I'm going to blow your mind with something that's going to very much upset you. I think you're more well known for your post-athletic career than for your athletic career. I'm not sure there's everybody like on Levitard. Are you sure that they all think that you're a former professional athlete? I think they think that you are a brilliantly scholared, well-mannered person, and not that you play football.
Yeah, I mean,
so you think of yourself though as a former athlete?
Yeah, I do, and I know you're right. I'm much more well known as TV or whatever personality than as an athlete. Yeah, but I do. I mean, my whole formative years, that's what I was. Like from the time I was 6 and I was the best athlete in my school to the time I mean, even through business school, I was still the athlete in business school. So it's I think I was 32 when I got out of business school. So like, of course, yeah, I kind of see myself as Black first, then an athlete, then I guess American, and it goes down from there.
Are husband and father below those three?
No, they're I don't know.
I've
I
never
guess.
ranked that. You just did a top 5 ranking of who you are. I've
Yeah.
never actually done that. Do you have
Um,
black as your number one no matter what?
I think so, yeah. Is
Interesting.
if how I identify myself.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Is this how you're identifying yourself or how people are identifying you?
No, I think it's probably how I identify myself, which is somewhat influenced by how people identify me, but I do think that it's how I identify myself.
So let's do this again. You have black first,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have athlete second.
Maybe, sure. Let's go with athlete, then
You know, this show
American.
is going to be seen by your wife and children, and my list would not have husband and father in my top 5 either, but I view you as a more accomplished person in that regard than I am.
Um, yeah, I don't know if I consider that identity, which may not be uh right, but yeah, I don't know if I. It's kind of like husband and father is who you kind of are. I don't know. This is weird. It's something I've never done. I'm glad we opened this door. It's a new game that
It's
we can
something we
play.
should think about
Yeah.
because couldn't I say the same thing about being black or being white?
Yeah, no, I'm sure you could. It's just the way that I view it is like it's maybe it's yeah, I don't know. You could definitely say it about being an athlete.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So
And that's why I found it fascinating how high up it was. I think you should think about this, Dominique. We don't have to do it right now because I want to talk about other stuff because you haven't answered who your toughest negotiation was with.
my son, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
I know you I know it feels like I'm cheating, but
Yeah, that's a little, I'm not
you
loving
want
that answer.
you want me to pick like some
I want an agent. I want a coach. I want an owner. I want a moment in your career. I want ESPN. I want John Skipper. I want somebody who you had to deal with where you wanted to get something and there was someone in your way and you got rid of that issue and got what you wanted.
uh well, I mean, the toughest negotiations are ones that I did not get what I want, probably, not ones where I did get what I want. Uh, yeah, I think I'm going to disappoint you because negotiations don't take place in the room. That's been my experience. And maybe you feel differently is like people want to talk about negotiations like it's playing hardball in the room or you tricked the
I agree
opponent
with you.
on the other side. Like to me, the negotiations take place along the way and it's about the leverage that you can create or the leverage that they can create. And so the negotiations aren't tough as much as it is the circumstances tough. And there hasn't been any tougher circumstances than going up against the NFL.
But I'm talking more macro in my mind when I say this and talk about the toughest negotiation because I say this on Nothing Personal and people don't believe me. The negotiation for a new CBA happens the day after the CBA is ratified.
It starts, yeah.
That's when the start of the next
Yeah.
negotiation happens. And that's why you can look at statements made by a union or by an owner or by the commissioner when they meet the media. It's all positioning for when they're next, quote unquote, in the room, because you're exactly right. By the time you're in the room, the battle is 75% done.
Yeah. You just have to pick what you want because the playing field's already been determined. So yeah, those I'd say the league has been the toughest negotiations.
So you've had this amazing life and you're only in the, I would say, I'm going to say top of the bottom 3, maybe top 4, somewhere in that range. I'm right now in the 7th inning stretch, maybe, although I like to think of myself in the 6th, but we'll wait to see. What is that? Do you ever think about not your legacy? That's too boring a question, but a lesson that from all of your experience, that if you could sit your kids down, and I think about this all the time, not being the father of the year, what is the lesson that you wish that your kid would get, your 3 children, that they would get now instead of having to learn it through experience?
Relationships are incredibly important. And I think it's something that I missed out on, whereas I kind of grew up and again, seeing myself as an athlete, I grew up in the world, kind of viewing the world and through a sports prism where it's like, if you're the best, you'll be fine. And I've come to realize that that's not true. And not only relationships from a personal standpoint, I think I neglected a lot of those and I regret that. But I also think from a professional standpoint, the difference, I think, in the people at the very top is not who is the smartest, it's who has the the best relationships or have access to best relationships, or who gets the call when there's an opportunity, who's able to make calls and get those things returned, who people like. Like, honestly, that's what I've come to realize as I've gotten
likability
older.
as a factor. Is that a top 5 factor?
I think so.
Interesting. I think I want to do another top 5. The top 5 most important traits to have when you are negotiating. Likability is interesting. I think electability is more important than likability.
Yeah. I mean, I think those things aren't very different, but I think it's not just about in negotiations, but I think it's in professionally. It's like just being likable. You'll get into positions because there's people.
Well, you make me more likable. Thank you for that. I love working with you. So I hope we get to do it again. I appreciate that you took the time. I know that time is something that we do not have a lot of. So I appreciate that you did this. And please, could you let the audience know where they can find you?
Sure. Domonique Foxworth Show. Download it. It's on all the podcast places, and you can also watch it on YouTube and on ESPN2 on Fridays.
I love that. Domonique, thanks for your time.
Appreciate it, David.